ברוכים הבאים לפודקאסט של שפות-שלי, בית ספר לאנגלית ושפות נוספות. מקווה שיהיה לכם שבוע טוב יחסי למצב שקורה כרגע במדינה שלנו. So today we're going to talk about something which is happening also worldwide. כמובן, יש כמובן דיכוי משמעותי שקורה כרגע לעם היהודי בכלל, לא רק בישראל. And we're going to talk about a little bit about the Jewish way of dealing with oppression and overcoming oppression. This is actually an article by Rabbi Gvriel Khouran. Rabbi Gvriel Khouran and his wife Rachel have spent 5 years working for Aish Torah and college campuses in New York. He currently lives in Baltimore. MD, he continues to work as an outreach rabbi, a therapist, life coach, journalist, and grant writer. אני חושב שזה הכתבה הזאת היא מאוד מאוד מתאימה לזמנים שלנו כרגע. יעזור לנו קצת להבין איך העם היהודי בכלליות מתמודד עם מצבים של טרגדיה ודיכוי. זה לא משהו חדש לנו כעם, ויש כאן כתבה מאוד מאוד מעניין שנעבור עליה עכשיו. I'm going to come walk you guys through it in English בשפה האנגלית. I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast today and happy listening. So let's get started. So rather than wallowing in self-pity, Jews have always taken responsibility. Rabbi Khouran writes, after his mother passed away when he was in college, he felt like a terrible victim. He felt alone, angry, and scared. For years he walked around looking for pity from others. He wore his sorrows on his sleeve and hoping to gain sympathy. The problem was that no one likes being around a downer. Instead of having compassion for him, his friends ignored his pain. Only when he took responsibility for generating his own positive energy was he able to move on. Victimhood, להיות הקורבן, creates an insatiable desire for external support. As a passive victim, you look to others to help you move on. The first rule in therapy and personal growth is that only yourself can help yourself get better. And you can only help someone who wants to be helped. And ultimately, empower that person to help himself. So, תמיד, קודם כל, אתם יכולים לתת למישהו את הכוח לעזור לעצמו, אבל תמיד תזכרו that the only way to get better זה לעזור לעצמכם, בסופו של דבר. And then create positive energy, אנרגיה חיובית. So the Jewish secret, let's talk about the Jewish secret about overcoming oppression. Having survived over 2,000 years of persecution, the Jews could be the leaders of the cult of victimhood. מאוד קל לנו כעם לשחק אותה הקורבן. זה מאוד קל, זה מאוד פשוט. Whether it is the Roman conquest, the Spanish Inquisition, the pogroms of Eastern Europe, the Nazi genocide, multiple Arab invasions, or Hamas terror attacks, the horrors which we currently experienced, which is actually unthinkable. We have plenty of oppressors to blame for our suffering. However, the Jewish approach to suffering offers a radically different attitude to the commonplace practice of placing blame and feeling like a victim. In fact, may hold the secret to Jewish success and survival throughout the ages, and it can offer vital tools to help empower the oppressed people of the world, whether it be American minorities or Palestinian Arabs. The Jewish approach to suffering is to take responsibility, לקחת אחריות. זה הדרך שלנו להתמודד עם סבל. We believe that we are never the victim of circumstance. אנחנו אף פעם לא קורבנים של מצב מקרי. On the contrary, everything happens for a reason, and all challenges in life come to teach us a lesson in order to help us improve ourselves. When the Torah states numerous times that terrible suffering comes about because of one's spiritual deficiencies, it does not mean that these are unrelated punishments. Rather, they are signposts to facilitate our personal growth. In fact, the word for suffering in Hebrew, isurim, shares the same root as the word for self-improvement or chastisement, musar, which in turn shares the same root as a word to change directions. So, the Talmud therefore adjures us that if a person sees that suffering has befallen him, he should examine his deeds. זה רשום בתלמוד, ברכות, פרק א' 5. When suffering strikes, don't point the finger to blame others for your problem. Instead, look inward and see what you might have done to somehow deserve it. Does that mean you're blaming the victim? Saying that the victim can take responsibility for overcoming his trauma and growing from the experience does not exonerate the perpetrator. The Jewish philosophers ask the following questions. Does everything that happens is part of the divine plan? If Cain chose to harm Abel, is only helping to fulfill part of God's will. How then can Cain be punished for his soulful actions? Abel clearly needed to go through the experience of suffering for some reason. The answer is that although Abel's suffering is indeed part of God's plan, Cain didn't have to choose to be the harbinger of it. God could have brought it about in a different manner. The oppressor is therefore guilty no matter what, and will be held accountable even though it was only delivering a divine message. This approach does not exempt us from seeking justice and fighting against oppression. On the contrary, the Torah teaches us that we must strive to fix the world and fight evil as much as we can. Jews marched alongside African Americans during the Civil Rights Movement and have always spoken out for the rights of the poor, weak, and oppressed. However, seeking justice is very different from taking vengeance. Although acts of revenge feel heroic, they are really cowardly. Violence, terrorism, riots only perpetuate the victim status. The suffering is real and someone else may be deserving of punishment. However, wanting it does nothing to improve the situation or heal the past. Just because someone suffered does not mean he's a victim. He is forever a victim. So doesn't this attitude lead to beating yourself up whenever anything bad happens? I mean, זה מאוד קל להאשים את עצמך על כל דבר שקורה בהסבר הזה. אז בוא נפרק את זה טיפה. A life of introspection does not mean a life of self-depreciation. Beating yourself up means focusing excessively on the mistakes of the past. The Jewish concept of tshuva or repentance is forward-oriented. It does not dwell on what happened any more than necessary to propel you forward to a more positive future. Guilt arises when one feels that his past errors have permanently damaging effects. The Torah teaches that tshuva can actually repair the past so much that your sins become stepping stones of growth and are therefore elevated to the real realm of mitzvot, good deeds. Guilt and depression are feelings of stagnation. Taking responsibility for hardship leads to a life of growth and positivity. You don't feel victimized by the past. On the contrary, you are empowered to readily affect your future for the better by changing yourself. The Kotzker Rebbe once said, "When I was younger, I thought I would change the world. I then realized that I couldn't change the world. Instead, I would work on changing my city. Later, I realized that I couldn't change my city, but rather should just concentrate on changing my family. But now I've decided to try and change myself." This does not mean that one should ignore the suffering in the world. On the contrary, you must feel it deeply. However, the areas that we focus on are those directly within our area of control, namely ourselves. Focusing on things outside of your control, politics, the weather, the economy, lead to frustration, anger, paralysis, and depression. When people go through hardships, they often feel powerless. The goal of a therapist, mentor, or spiritual guide is to empower people to make free will decisions to better themselves. In this way, they're setting themselves over the one area of life where they truly possess control. When we change ourselves, it has a ripple effect that spreads outwards. Changing ourselves can actually change the world. This is in effect the Jewish concept of karma. As Gandhi said, we must be the change we wish to see in the world. No dogs, no Jews. The American Jewish experience exemplifies this point that one can succeed and change despite poverty and prejudice. As a Jew, our ancestors came to America lacking money, English, and a high education, and they faced incredible discrimination. It was not uncommon for establishment in certain parts of the country to display signs saying no dogs, no blacks, and no Jews. Nonetheless, they found a way to succeed financially while educating their children and having a positive effect on countless areas of American society. They succeeded because they knew that no one was going to help them if they didn't help themselves. They didn't wallow in the victimhood, they didn't blame, they didn't ask for pity or special compensation. They took responsibility for themselves, got to work, and were able to overcome. The same is true for the Jews of Israel. The state of Israel was founded largely by Holocaust survivors, orphans, and refugees who had every reason in the world to give up, to play the victim. What greater victims than they, who saw the world stand by in silence when 6 million of their brethren were systematically slaughtered. Nonetheless, instead of complaining, they got to work, building a future for themselves, in a mostly barren land of deserts and swamps. When they were attacked by numerous Arab countries on multiple fronts, who outnumbered them in both manpower and arms, they preserved. Instead of expecting handouts from the world, they took responsibility and arguably accomplished more growth than any country in the world over the past century, and I would say probably in the history of mankind. The future of the Palestinians. In an article in the Washington Post, Dennis Ross, counselor at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, Middle East negotiator under President Clinton and former special assistant to President Obama, writes about a speech he gave to over 200 Palestinians in Gaza City in 2005. He was invited by Gaza representative in the Palestinian Legislative Council to speak about the future of Gaza just months before Israel's unilateral withdrawal from the area. He told them that if they took the opportunity to develop Gaza peacefully, it would open up many new opportunities for the Palestinian people in the future. However, they chose to use Gaza as a launching pad to stage attacks on Israel. Instead, it would greatly limit their chances of someday having their own state. Much of Palestinians' history might be imposed on them by others, he said, but this time they had the power to shape the future. If they made the wrong choice, they could not blame the Arabs, the Europeans, the Americans, or the Israelis. Unfortunately, we know the path that Hamas chose. Although the Hamas victim line has succeeded in garnering worldwide support for their cause, it has done nothing to help the suffering of the Palestinian people. Whether one is a victim at the hands of whites, Israelis, Nazis, or Muslims, perpetrating one's victimhood leads to paralysis. The flip side of the attitude that others are responsible for my suffering means that they're also responsible for my success. It is the ultimate excuse for failure and is the antithesis of the attitude needed to begin to change. Only when the individual or community realizes that they and only they can take responsibility for succeeding can the seeds of change begin to sprout. Change must come from within. The victim mentality creates a self-perpetuating culture of victimhood. The true change must come from within. When the Palestinian people are ready to stop feeling like victims, they can begin to improve their situation in life. The same is true for minorities everywhere. We deeply feel their pain, but we have been there too. There are insurmountable obstacles in the way of the success. You must never minimize them. But the first step is a change in attitude. Stop blaming, stop complaining, and rise from the victimhood to victory. This is the Jewish way, and this is the Jewish approach. I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this podcast today. It just sheds a bit of light about the Jewish way, about the way we see any difficulties that we have in life, any struggles that we have, and also כמובן עוזר בזמנים קשים אלה להבין שלמרות שאנחנו היינו קורבנות, אנחנו נקום מזה חזקים יותר, גדולים יותר ומוצלחים יותר, כי זה הדרך של העם היהודי. אנחנו לא מתקרבנים, we take responsibility and we improve, we learn from our mistakes, we get better, we get stronger, we keep on growing, and nothing will stop the Israeli people or the Jewish nation. And I will see you again next week, hopefully with another interesting podcast. If you guys want to write in, you have any questions, feedback that you want to give us, or are interested in learning a new language, אנחנו מלמדים אנגלית, צרפתית, ספרדית, רוסית, ערבית, בעברית, עולים חדשים. If you guys are interested in learning a little bit about our courses and the way we teach, we have a very unique teaching method. אנחנו כמובן תמיד נשמח לעזור. שמי אריאל, אתם יכולים למצוא אותנו קשר בוואטסאפ 053-550-1976, או כמובן גם לחייג, או במייל info@שפות-שלי.co.il. מקווה שיהיה לכם שבוע טוב ומוצלח ובטוח, ותמיד תזכרו, אנחנו ננצח ביחד. שבוע טוב.